And welcome into the MLB Hot Stove Daily here at the Upside Sports Network. Appreciate you guys joining us on a Tuesday evening. Night 3 of the winter meetings is upon us, and boy, what a day it was. We got the surprising signing of Edwin Diaz, 3 years, $69 million, with a little bit of deferred money anyway, going to the Los Angeles Dodgers. The Mets, unfortunately, are unable to capitalize on their star closer, retaining him and pairing him with Devin Williams at the back of that bullpen. Lots of fallout around Edwin Diaz. We'll get into a lot of that discussion. We'll also discuss the signing of Kyle Schwarber, 5-year, $150 million, $30 million average annual value. He ultimately turned down several other offers that were at least as good, if not better, than what the Phillies were offering. Tells you how comfortable he was in Philadelphia and why he went back there is that comfort level. So congratulations on to Schwarber, his family, for getting the contract that he wanted. For a DH, this is by far the biggest contract we have ever seen. Also the biggest contract we have ever seen for a closer. So we'll see what happens over the next few years with the lifetime of these contracts. Will they age well? Will they not? Do these teams decide to pivot in other ways to kind of alleviate some of the salary concerns that they may now have? Speaking specifically of the Dodgers and their bullpen situation, they're looking to kind of remodel that thing on the fly here. They did it last year. I imagine they'll try to do it once again. The first step is done with Edwin Diaz now being on their payroll, and we'll see what they decide to do with Tanner Scott. Do they decide to move him to a setup role? Or do they decide to go ahead and jettison his contract elsewhere and see if they can utilize that money a little bit better than the way it would be if it was a setup man? So they do have lots of options in the bullpen, none of which they were happy with at the end of last year. That's why they went out there and brought in Edwin Diaz. Other news from around Major League Baseball today. Rob Thompson had agreed to a 1-year extension with the Philadelphia Phillies. He will no longer be a lame duck manager. This is kind of a courtesy more than anything else. I wouldn't necessarily say this precludes them from firing him at the end of the season or during the season if they get off to a rough enough start. So Phillies have kind of been stuck in a contractual nightmare for the past couple of years. Same thing goes with this offseason. The only real thing that we're going to do this offseason is try to bring back their own free agents, and so far, so good. We'll see what happens with Suarez and if they decide to add other pieces around the periphery like they did last year with bringing in Max Kepler and others. But that's probably the path forward right now for the Philadelphia Phillies. We'll get into a lot of the trade talks that are going around Major League Baseball. I was expecting to see some bigger trades happening today, and yet we still haven't seen that big fish ultimately get flipped. We still are waiting on the quote-unquote Soto-level trade coming from the Padres. Rangers are supposedly playing possum, according to several different front offices out there. They're telling reporters anyway that they don't believe the Texas Rangers when they say that they are not willing to spend at the levels they were at in previous seasons. I do not think they're playing possum. I think it's a legitimate stance. Sure, they would love to have gotten off of Marcus Semion's contract anyway, but I think the impetus for getting that deal done was saving a few dollars against their salary structure this season. Brendan Nimmo does also fill a need, so basically taking off a bad contract and bringing on another bad contract Basically, it works better in the short term for the Texas Rangers. They'll figure out years 3, 4, 5 of the Nimmo deal at that point. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Texas Rangers are indeed trimming payroll like they have said they're going to be doing basically since the All-Star break. They talked about it last year as well. They showed a willingness to go just above the luxury tax threshold, or the collective bargaining agreement, the tax threshold anyway, based off of what most people are calculating last year. We'll see what the final numbers ultimately turn out to be, but ultimately, I still think the Rangers are going to try to trim a little bit more payroll. There has been some rumblings about Corey Seager heading into the winter meetings. We'll see if that ultimately happens. A lot of questions in our comment section, so we'll try to run through those here in just a moment. Other news around Major League Baseball: Edward Cabrera. Lots of teams in on Edward Cabrera from the Miami Marlins. Probably suits up best as a number 3 in a playoff rotation. If you're kind of a struggling team, probably more of a number 2. He has the ability to be a number 2 in anybody's rotation when he's pitching right. And he's a controllable starter. Orioles are one of many teams that are said to be in there, but I wouldn't necessarily limit it to, say, 5 or 6 teams. I wouldn't be surprised if there's as many as 12 to 15 teams talking with the Marlins about Cabrera. So we shall see. Welcome in, everybody. Try to run through a few of these comments here and then get in some of the other news items of the day. All right, let's see here. Mark, Ethan, Joe, Anthony, welcome in. Appreciate you guys joining us. Yankees are asleep. I think they still got some big fish to fry. I don't think they're necessarily asleep, but they always try to get their big ticket items done. Last year, they did try to piecemeal it along as well by signing some of their smaller needs along the way, but we have yet to see that happen so far this offseason. There is some reticence from New York media about their willingness to really spend this offseason. Hal Steinbrenner, of course, trying to preach how, fiscal responsibility and those kinds of things. I don't necessarily buy it still. They are the New York Yankees. They will ultimately end up spending. Will it be enough to satisfy Yankees fans? Never. Will it be enough to satisfy the New York media? Never. The Dodgers obviously are going to be the cream of the crop when it comes to spending here in Major League Baseball, but they still have spent a pretty good penny on what their roster is already on the field. Now, of course, they still have more holes to fill, and they do have the budget to go ahead and solve those issues. We'll see if they have the wherewithal to get it done. Upside, I feel my Marlins got screwed with the lottery. Would have ended up moving down in the majority of teams above us. Multiple first overall and top 5 picks the last few years. I will say the lottery, congratulations to the White Sox. They get the number 1 pick. To me, a lottery is a true crapshoot to me. Some of the worst teams, they should be getting the best chances to get those top picks. That's the way they currently have it. But you don't necessarily want it to be just a true 1-for-1. Say in the NFL, if you're the worst team, you automatically get the first overall pick, and so forth and so on. I do like the ability to do a lottery, especially when we've seen teams over the years tank and tank and tank again and again and again in Major League Baseball. And I like how they restrict teams from getting or moving up in drafts in consecutive years. So I do like that aspect of it. I do still think the process could be fine-tuned just a little bit more. But overall, I'm pretty satisfied with the way the lottery worked out today. The team that should have won the lottery this year, to me, won the lottery. All right, Ryan, welcome in. You did get Mr. Trumpet there. Edwin Diaz going to the Dodgers there. Ethan, Boston and Rangers are deep and have big talks regarding Seager to Boston. Let's see what a mock trade looks like. I've heard some rumblings about pretty much the big market teams all being in to some level on Corey Seager at some point over the last 2 months. I haven't heard anything too specific dealing with the Red Sox. If you could send that to me, I would love to see it. But for me, let's go ahead and pull up what a trade could look like between the Red Sox and Rangers. All right, so the Red Sox, we'll go ahead and pull them up here first. Rangers, again, we've talked about Corey Seager pretty much each of the last 2 nights. I just believe there's too much smoke for there not to be fire with the Rangers when it comes to trimming payroll, specifically here with Corey Seager. Wow, look at that jump. MLB Trade Rumors has fixed Corey Seager's value. It was -24. Now it's at -3. 6 years left, $189 million. Roughly $30 million a year left on his deal. We're going to send him to the Red Sox. What would the Red Sox have to give up? Do you bring back Trevor Story if you're the Rangers? I would say no. Yoshida, possibly. I think that actually could be a legitimate possibility. Rangers are looking for a right-handed hitting outfielder. That could be an option there. Ryan, Phillies will regret that contract with Schwarber over the next 2 seasons. If you missed our live earlier in the day when we had the breaking news that Schwarber had signed and Diaz had signed, we talked a little bit about the contract with Kyle Schwarber. Schwarber, to me, over the life of that contract, is probably going to be fine for sure for the next 2 years. He's been Mr. Consistent, 38 home runs, 108 RBIs, 150 games, only been on the injured list once over the last 4 years. On base percentage, low strikeout rate, walk rate's higher, all those kinds of things. I will say that's pretty much going to be the MO for Schwarber at least the next 2 seasons. Third year is where you're going to probably see a little bit of a decline, maybe an injured list stint or two, soft tissue injuries start to percolate. Season 4 and 5, 5 to me is going to be a complete crapshoot. Whether or not that power starts to regress, the strikeout rate goes up, walk rate goes down, those kinds of things could really hinder a DH like him in years 4 or 5, certainly in year 5, but I'd say at least the first couple of years, Phillies should be just fine. John Heyman, Ketel Marte market heating up. Red Sox, Mariners. Let me see if I can pull up the tweet real quick as it just came across my phone. Ketel Marte market heating up. Red Sox, Mariners, Jays, possibly Phillies, and Rays. D-backs seeking a big package, understandably, for their superstar second baseman. I would say the Red Sox, Mariners probably have the inside track on that. I think the Jays don't necessarily have enough on the prospect side of things, unless they're willing to include Yasevich, and I would not do that at this point with the success Yasevich showed in the postseason. Phillies, I think that's more of a connection, once again, for the Alec Bohm possibility. I don't see the Phillies necessarily having the right pieces to get that deal done unless they're willing to move 2 of their top 4 prospects, and I don't see that happening. Rays, cost control player, they have the wherewithal to do it. Again, be wary of trading with the Rays. But for me, if I had to handicap this thing, I'd probably say 1 would be the Red Sox, 2 the Mariners, 3 the Rays. And then I'm sure there's other teams that are in this market as well that I'd put before the Jays or Phillies in this. But I'd say Mariners and Red Sox 1 and 2, flip-flop them around however you want there. But I think those 2 make legitimate possibilities for Ketel Marte. There it is. There's the link I was looking for. MLB trade rumors. Red Sox Rangers have discussed Corey Seager, according to Boston Globe people. Joins the growing list of Boston trade targets that includes Ketel Marte, Isaac Paredes, and Brendan Donovan. Club has also been connected to Bo Bichette and Eugenio Suarez. Interesting. Now, I was reading an article before I came on the air anyway about the Astros and their need to fix their issues with their glut of infielders. They specifically targeted Paredes and Christian Walker as one of the guys that probably needs to be moved out of town here. Injuries were such an issue for the Astros last year. I don't necessarily see it that way. I think they could honestly bring in another piece and put one of those guys in the outfield from time to time and just keep going like they did last year. But you have an everyday DH right now, one of the best hitters in the game in Yordan Alvarez, taking over that DH spot every single game. I don't see the impetus to try to move on from Paredes and or Christian Walker. They say because there's $30 million tied up in those 2 guys, maybe shifting off a little bit of the money, reallocating it to much needed help in the starting rotation or back in the bullpen or in the outfield would be a better utilization of that money. I would argue I'd rather hold on to those guys, keep the strength in the infield, and have possibly one of those guys flex to the outfield when necessary. And then you also look at the injury issues they had last year. They needed every bit of that depth to get through the season. So I don't necessarily buy that. Let's go ahead and wrap up this trade possibility with the Boston Red Sox, what a trade would have to look like in order to get the deal done. So if they bring in Corey Seager, would that preclude them from bringing in Ketel Marte? I would believe not. Rafael would be a nice get. $58 million is all that he's got left on his contract, and he was a godsend for them last year. Rangers are looking for more contact more than anything else. You're not going to get Roman Anthony, obviously. Marcelo Mayer is off the chart, or is not available in this deal either. I would say Jarren Duran is unavailable in this type of a deal. I think if you structure enough money to make this thing work, you could possibly get a guy like Rafaela. I think it'd still come down a little bit lower than that. Connolly Early, I think would be one guy I might look at here. Witherspoon would be another one here in a Corey Seager deal. They just brought in Sonny Gray. I don't think they're necessarily against bringing in big salaries. Just trying to see what could make some sense here. They brought in Oviedo. I don't necessarily see a straight up trade here. Doesn't say anything about them being necessarily close on a deal. These dang ads are frustrating. I'm not paying to get rid of ads. I clicked on the X and it won't go away. Whatever. Let's see here. Trevor Story handled the position primarily. If you took back Trevor Story, just a thought. If you took back Trevor Story, that would basically be the equivalent of eating $55 million of the Seager contract. If you took back Yoshida, you could get one heck of a return out of Boston. That's $18 million coming off the books this year. That's what, $27 million coming off the books this year. So that's what, $45 million off the books for them. So that's 14 more million on the books for Texas this year and next. Texas wouldn't be able to do anything in free agency this year, most likely. Most likely not next year either. Those would be expiring deals. Rangers did have interest in Trevor Story the year Seager did sign with them. Could be interesting. My guess would be he would be a part-time player in Texas anyway. I don't think you can afford bringing back both if you're Texas. So if Story is the guy you bring back for salary, I think you'd have to in order for this deal to work with Boston, because they're not going to hold on to Story in this scenario. Story takes over as your shortstop this season, at least for Texas in the short term. Maybe splits time with Josh Smith out there. But then what could you get if you included Story in this deal? So you're looking roughly $30 million here. As far as value, I don't think you're going to get one of these elite young starters. I think they're going to hold on to one of those guys for a Ketel Marte trade. So I think that leaves you with the possibility of maybe a Franklin Arias. What does their prospect pool look like, just out of curiosity here? Arias is their number one at Double-A, still a year and a half away. Last year, went through 3 levels, 10 games at Double-A, barely did anything. High A last year hit 6 homers, 32 walks, 35 strikeouts. Not a whole lot of speed either, it looks like. High A hit 346, 19 games, no homers. Not exactly a target that I would necessarily go for in this deal, because I would say this would open up Walcott to be your long-term shortstop as soon as the middle of the season. Minors last year, Tolle just went through 3 different levels: High A, Double A, and Triple A. He could use a little bit more time in the minors, but he's dang close. I like him. Witherspoon, first round pick last year. And then early last year, he pitched well. Young starter at the MLB level, ready to go. Strikeout numbers are good. Walk numbers are decent. This could be a centerpiece of the deal. I could see that. Especially now that they've got their rotation pretty much solidified for this season. And it would leave their top targets here in a deal for Ketel Marte if they wanted to go that route. Finances would be an issue in a couple of years, I'm sure, for Boston. But if you put Early as the headliner of this deal, about another 9 is what you could get out of him. Whitlock, I doubt. Romero wasn't either 6. Yeah, he's at AAA too, so he's close. Not exactly moving the needle for me. Ouch. No thank you. Soto, rookie ball. Hello. 307, 47 games, 51 hits. Not a lot of power. Strikeouts are a bit of an issue. Could be an interesting piece. Just trying to find the final piece of this deal if we're going to do a deal with Boston. Catcher, they don't really have anything that excites me. That'd be the one hole the Rangers could use to fill. Nothing really there. So what do we go back here and what do they have on the major league side of things? Romy Gonzalez, maybe? Doesn't exactly move the needle for me again. Let's go to page 2. I'm just going to throw in a couple of lottery tickets here. If I remember correctly, Juan Valera was one player I liked a lot at the deadline last year. Let me see what he ended up at. Didn't exactly exceed expectations at high A. Pitched really well in 24. You've taken a little bit of a flyer on Valera at that point. Cespedes. No. I'm going to look at one more player here. Another 25 pick. And Taylor. High A, no thanks. Okay, so that would be my trade essentially. Valera's value is probably more like a 2 or a 3 after last year's poor performance. But those are just more filler than anything else. The real get would be getting Early and getting off of the money of Seager. You're still taking back the negative ballast there of Trevor Story there. Are there better trades than this out there for the Rangers if they ultimately decide to move Corey Seager? Absolutely. I would be looking specifically again at the 3 teams we've mentioned over and over again. Braves, Yankees, Dodgers. But now that the Red Sox have at least entered the chat and are the first team we've seen mentioned with them, could be an interesting one. There. It was bothering me that it said day 1 on there anyway. All right, let's try to catch up to a few more of these comments here. Let's see here. Chris, welcome back. If the Chicago Cubs are really still in for Bregman, who might the trade partner for Nico Horner be, allowing Matt Shaw to move to second base? Pretty much anybody. I could see anywhere from the Padres to the Rangers to the Red Sox. A lot of different teams could be in the market for a guy like Nico Horner if that's the move they decide to do here. As something just pops through, let me see what it is. More talk about the Rangers and Red Sox talking Corey Seager. If they're talking about it at this stage, tells me there's probably a little bit more fire to this thing than even I thought coming into the winter meetings. Because you don't let this kind of talk get out about your best player unless you're getting ready to make some type of a move. If we hear anything else at the winter meetings when it comes to the Corey Seager trade possibilities, I think there's a good chance we could see something really big happen in the next day or so. Okay, thought we were about to get some interesting news on Giannis for a second there. It's basically he held a meeting with teammates basically saying not to worry about his future and just play basketball. Scared me for a minute there. Bear with me as I try to clear up my phone here. Got too many messages coming in. Okay, there we go. Let's try to catch up on a few more of these comments here, and then we'll get into some of the other news items of the day. Upside, according to Carlos Collazo, J.P. Morosi and Ken Rosenthal, they're saying that the trade conversation with the Marlins is either the Orioles or the Rangers for Edward Cabrera are heating up. I mean, I could definitely see Edward Cabrera going to the Rangers. That would be a great get in my mind. Just to kind of see what his contract looks like, just so you see what his value is. I do like Cabrera quite a bit. Page 1. All right, his value currently, 3 years left, only 17.6, obviously as arbitration and that kind of a thing. But for me, that's a ridiculously good value for what he could bring to the table. For the Rangers, he would be more of their number 4 or 5 starter here. You got DeGrom, Eovaldi, Leiter as the 1, 2, 3. Kumar Rocker, Jacob Latz, Bradford, and this would be entering in Cabrera into this mix here. Value here is only 27. So, say the Red Sox were the team that ultimately came up with the deal. If they were looking to somehow facilitate a trade that would allow the Rangers to bring in Cabrera in as part of the return for Corey Seager, that could make sense as part of a 3-team trade and send some hitters from the Boston Red Sox, i.e. Christian Campbell, if they were able to bring in Ketel Marte. Campbell would no longer have a future there in Boston. He's under a cheap contract that would obviously appeal to the Marlins. That would be an interesting move. In fact, that actually makes a little too much sense the way I just walked through that one. Sometimes things just happen and they just make sense when you say them out loud. Sometimes they don't. But let's say Cabrera goes to the Rangers as part of the return for Seager, right? Red Sox then offload Campbell at 20, goes to the Marlins. Story goes to the Rangers, obviously. Your value here is still positive for both Miami. Miami could use... Hold on. Wrong team for Seager. Seager to the Red Sox. There we go. That makes more sense. Okay. So the Red Sox could still add a little bit more to their trade to make it a little bit more even here. Rangers could still use more. Marlins need more as well. So it's going to have to come from Boston. So Campbell would be the beginning of this package. And if you get down into this range, if you threw a Gonzalez at this, that would make it interesting for Miami. Casas would make a little bit of sense as well. But I'm going to say Gonzalez is the name that goes to Miami in this deal. Now Miami can throw in another 5. If Miami throws in a catcher, that might work. Catcher, round 5. Liam Hicks is around 5. And there we go. Just did that from the seat of my pants. And that actually makes some sense. Red Sox land Corey Seager for the cost of offloading Trevor Story, losing Christian Campbell and Gonzalez, which if they bring in Marte, Campbell is superfluous at that point anyway, had his struggles. But Miami would see that he's still very young, still has plenty of upside left, under cost control. Romy Gonzalez, still 3 years left, cost control. Rangers fill their need by replacing Seager in the lineup with Trevor Story, at least until Sebastian Walcott is ready to take over the position. And if Story has a great first half, awesome. That'd just be a bonus at this point. You get to solve your number 4 starter in your rotation who has 2 more years of control after this one, so 3 full seasons. And you get your backup catcher who has some control as well. This is a home run trade if you're the Rangers. Could it be better with, Trevor Story being, not included and Yoshida being included in this deal? Yes. But I think they would demand Story is in this deal. I like that deal. Let's go ahead and post that one. What's it not liking? Oh, it's because the Rangers only gave up a negative asset. That's why it's not going to like it. Seager. There we go. Okay. Let's get back to some news here. Master Vinman, welcome in. Appreciate you joining us once again. Andrew, welcome back. Guillermo, welcome in, welcome in. I think the Phillies run it back. I agree. I don't think there's really a place that the Phillies can go right now to solve some of their issues without running it back more than anything else. Nothing major breaking at the moment. Just double checking to make sure I'm not missing something. Okay, let's keep it going down the list here. Guillermo, what's with the Yankees? Well, still pretty much the same issues we had, last night. They're still waiting on the big fish to come down the pike. They still have other holes now in their bullpen to fill. Luke Weaver specifically, I think, now has to be their top priority in the bullpen to bring back. Now that Devin Williams is off the board and they can't upgrade necessarily by bringing in Edwin Diaz. I think there's a couple other closers that they could still turn to, some late inning guys that they could turn to. But for me, they still need to bring back what to me was the Swiss Army knife in their bullpen, Luke Weaver. Whether he had his ups and downs last year is irrelevant. You just have to keep at least status quo in that bullpen as far as I'm concerned. Devin Williams, of course, had his issues last year for them, but I think we can all agree that the Yankees, the best years that they had in recent memory anyway, was when they had basically a four-headed monster at the back end of that bullpen with Zach Britton, Dylan Betances. I'm missing like 2 others in that group though, but they had so many good arms back there. Andrew Miller at one point was in there. David Robertson was in there at one point. They just had so many good arms that they could turn to. Aroldis Chapman was in that mix. That once you get into the 6th or 7th inning in a postseason game, it was church. You had to beat up on the starting pitcher. Nowadays, their starting pitchers, they certainly got 3 or 4 of them that they can trust. I imagine they're still going to try to add one more to that mix. It seems like that's their prerogative this offseason, but I really like what they got coming with Garrett Cole, Max Fried. Rodon's been better. Luis Gil at some point will get back to his form that he had. I imagine coming back from the injury is going to take some time for him. But they certainly have a good mix there with their starting group, and they still want to improve it and add one more. If you do that and you don't take care of the bullpen, you're right back where you were last year with the bullpen and issues going into the deadline. So you make all kinds of acquisitions. A couple of them work out, a couple of them don't. But to me, you have to at least get back to that level in that bullpen. Otherwise, you're taking a step back, unfortunately. All right, let's keep it going here. Ryan, giving a guy with a career .230 average, $30 million is insane. Talking about Kyle Schwarber, he's a different kind of player. On base percentage, low strikeout, high walk, lots of power, 108 runs, or RBIs anyway, and consistency, availability, all those kinds of things. That's why he got the $30 million, and it wasn't just the Phillies that were offering him that money. Surprisingly, the Orioles were in there, along with a couple other clubs at similar money, if not more. I do think that the Phillies had to get this deal done. I do think it will age poorly in years 4 or 5 of this deal, but it's a deal they had to get done one way or the other. You're going to pay for the production that you're going to get for the first 3 years of the deal, and then you're going to suffer for it in years 4 and 5. And it's just the way it's going to go. Philly, we all knew was going to age out in probably 3 or 4 years anyway, and with Schwarber's deal on this one, just makes that period of pain even more painful for the Phillies fans at that point. Glad to see Edwin Diaz out of the NL East. If you're a team other than the Mets, I completely understand that, but let's look at things the other way around. The Mets are still going to have that money to go out there and add other pieces to that roster. They still need to add 2 starters, at least 2 starters in my mind. They still need to add another bat, and now they have another hole in that bullpen to fill. I don't think Devin Williams is the only addition that they will bring in to solve their issues in the bullpen. Andrew, I don't got any more moves. As my screen bounces there, let me try to scroll back up here. Andrew, I don't see any more moves tonight. I do think we will get a trade sometime in the next, I'll call it 2 hours. I do think the trade talks have been so deep over the last couple of nights that we're going to get something, and I do think it will be soon. I still think Scooball could be had by the Dodgers. Your thoughts? I wouldn't rule it out. Just like I told you guys last year, anything that the Dodgers want to do, they can do. It's just a matter of whether or not they're going to completely overpay for him. We talked about that last night as well. If you're willing to give up your top six prospects, if you're the Dodgers, and just go from there. I think that it would easily get you enough to bring in 1 year of Tarek Skubal, and then of course he's a free agent. The Tigers could try to sign him, but at that point you already have the six top prospects from the Dodgers system. You're happy with what you got at that point. Will the Dodgers do something crazy like that and offer that much in return for 1 year of Tarek Skubal? No, they're still going to operate with some restraint. They still just won the World Series and the one before that. They just got the top closer on the market. Now, does that rule them out as far as trying to get Skubal? No. I still think they're going to try to do any and every possible thing that they can do to improve their roster, just like any good front office would, just like you'd want your own front office to do the same thing in that situation. All right. Let's see here. It'd be 33 by the season starts. Yeah, we were talking again about Schwarber there. I just think the first few years are going to be more of the same for Schwarber, and then again, 4 and 5, a little bit tougher. Go to MLB Rumors. Yes, thank you, Ethan. Red Sox interested in Paredes. They've dipped their toe in a lot of different trade talks there, JG. We just talked about Paredes and Walker, the possibility of Seager as well, Ketel Marte. Red Sox are certainly looking on the trade side of things, but we shall see. Welcome in, JG. Appreciate you joining us. Nando, welcome back. If the Dodgers trade for Skubal, there will be an extension attached to it. I would imagine so. We saw that with Glasnow when he came over from the Rays. Basically signed an extension, along with the trade or right thereafter. I can't remember if it was in conjunction with, but it was pretty much right, 1-2 back to back. So we'll see. Upside, can you do two separate mark trade for both the Rangers and the Orioles? You're talking about Cabrera? I mean, the Orioles would make a lot of sense. They're looking for controllable starting pitching, as is every team out there. Won't matter next year, lockout. Yeah, I kind of agree there that lockout is coming very close, is almost a guarantee at this point. Upside, I disagree with you. I wouldn't worry about the Rays. I think they're the favorite because they can give the Diamondbacks what they want. Carson Williams and 3 young starters. I just think that they're not necessarily going to step out as far as these other teams will. Their drive to win, I think, is greater than that of the Rays. While their drive to win might be similar in certain respects, I think their ability to go, or their comfortability going to the max in a trade for a player like Marte would keep them back a little bit further behind than other teams that might be willing to pony up a little bit more. Think of the Dave Dombrowskis, the older GMs of the world, different era of thinking, that competitiveness, that drive to win, that pushes the envelope, says the heck with the prospects a little bit sooner than today's newer, younger GMs usually think. I'm not saying that these GMs like Craig Breslow and others of their ilk are thinking along those lines. I just think the market that they're in dictates that they act with a little bit more urgency than that of the Rays. And I think we saw a little bit of that last year with Garrett Crochet and other pieces coming into Boston. Alex Bregman. I think this is the next year's version of that. And I think that's gonna be the difference between the Rays getting a guy like Ketel Marte or the Red Sox or the Mariners or any other team that is in the running for a Ketel Marte. I wouldn't trade Paredes. I agree. Going backwards, couldn't agree with you more. Harley, what would Boston Seager trade look like? We just did that one. I invite you guys to check that out here from a few minutes ago if you want to check that one out. Duran and Seager and 45 million. For Seager and 45 million, I'm not taking back Duran. I like our outfield mix as it is. I do think they're looking for a right-handed hitter. Duran, I believe, is a lefty or switch. I can't remember, but I know he's not a righty straight up. So I would be looking for other pieces. I would say probably a starting pitcher. Maybe a third baseman would be the way I would want to go, or at least a replacement to replace the bat in the lineup of a Corey Seager. Duran might help out in that regard as far as a lefty in the lineup, but I think there's other ways to improve the roster other than bringing in Duran. Sean, thank you for the super chat once again. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you very much. If Marte goes to the Red Sox, is Bregman gone? I would say no. I think this would be getting a guy like Ketel Marte on the cheap would actually make the possibility of Alex Bregman returning even more likely. I think that they would then have the ability to move on from a Christian Campbell, or maybe Campbell's involved in that deal along with the starting pitcher, back to the Arizona Diamondbacks to make that deal work. But for me, I would say that Bregman to the Red Sox, if they bring in Ketel Marte, would actually be more likely, because then again, it's only $12 million that you're spending on Ketel Marte for the next 5 years. You can afford to bring in an Alex Bregman, a little bit higher cost third baseman. And if you bring in Corey Seager as well, boy oh boy, Red Sox go from a team that probably finishes third in the division as they currently sit, to maybe a team that challenges for the Blue Jays at the top of the division, or maybe even for a World Series. We shall see. But if you did something like that, I wouldn't rule anything out if I'm a fan of the Boston Red Sox. As far as the Cubs and their pursuit of Bregman, I know that they're certainly going to stick through this one all the way to the end. That is their number one target in free agency, as far as I've been told. On the offensive side of things, pitching to me still has to be their priority if I were in that front office. But it sounds like Bregman is their top priority from a lineup construction standpoint. We'll see if they get that one done. But that could take a little bit of time, as it did last year. Are they willing to wait and let these other options, backup options, go by? Or do they settle on one of those guys like a Eugenio Suarez? That'll be something to watch for if you are a Cubs fan. Ethan, what about Rangers taking, or what about the Rangers take Jordan Hicks, try him at closer? Um, the Braves are still going to hold on to him. Um, Jordan Hicks, no, not that's the other one I'm thinking of. That's Ronaldo Lopez I'm thinking of. Jordan Hicks, they could try as closer. They had the possibility of bringing him in a couple of years ago at the trade deadline. Ultimately, chose not to do the Jordan Hicks deal um, for whatever reason. I can't remember what the specific reason was. I know he was a little bit wild, and Mike Maddox and Bruce Bochy were not crazy about walks. I think that was the reason why they chose to go in a different direction than Jordan Hicks in their pursuit of help at the bullpen a couple of years ago. In their run to the World Series, I think that was the reason why they chose not to bring in Jordan Hicks. Both of those guys are now gone. I think the sentiment still remains, though, as far as limiting walks, and I think for that reason Hicks would not be attractive as he would be to other teams, as he would be to the Rangers, for instance. Nando, Dodgers have Sheehan, Stone, Ryan, Crack, and Kasparis. They got to be working on a trade, right? You would think so, but every year they seem to be able to hold on to a lot of these top prospects, and end up needing that depth before it's all said and done. If Marte goes to the Red Sox and Bregman's gone, yes, we just answered that one for you, Sean. Will we get more action tomorrow? We'll actually get more tonight, I would imagine. So stay tuned with us. We're probably going to be live for at least another half hour. Last year we did get, last night we did get a little bit of activity right as we were hanging up the phones. So hopefully we get some more this evening. Add Hicks to the deal so Texas gets a bigger return. You could do that, but again, I don't think Texas necessarily values Hicks at the level, say, other teams will. Mark, I think we'll get a passing bomb tonight yet. I agree with you there, Mark. Jose, I would throw Alec Boehm and Bryson Stott in a top prospect for Ketel Marte. Phillies have been trying to do that for the better part of, 3 years now? That deal ain't going to work. They've tried and tried and tried to trade Alec Boehm for anything of value that they would like, and it's just not happening. Now, Boehm had a nice year last year. Is he at the level of a Ketel Marte? Heck no. And is he at the cost certainty of a Ketel Marte as well? Heck no. I would say Ketel Marte certainly has a lot more value. Now, as far as adding in Bryson Stott and a top prospect, would make it a little bit closer, would at least make it a conversation. But for me, I still think other teams are going to end up finishing a little bit better in that race for Ketel Marte. Mark, I wish Toronto had better prospects for Ketel. Well, if you were willing to trade Yusevich, I think you could at least re-enter the conversation. But for right now, I'm going to say he probably ends up elsewhere. What are the Astros up to? They're looking quite a bit at the trade front right now, possibly trying to free up some money, playing time at the first base spot, with possibly moving on from the contract of a Christian Walker. Appreciate you joining us, Texas A&M. Thank you very much. Appreciate you. Ethan, Edward Cabrera is better than Leiter today, and he would be the Rangers number 3 and Leiter to be 4. Let's be honest, I love Leiter. I would say heck no. I think Leiter is a legit number 2 in most rotations in Major League Baseball right now. I think we saw Bruce Bochy try to teach him some lessons last year in the beginning of the year, And I think he took those to heart as far as being pulled early in certain outings, especially at the end of his rookie, at the end of not this past season, but the season before. I think this season was really a nice step forward for Jack Leiter. I don't think he's a number 3. I view him as a legitimate number 2. Say if Eovaldi for some reason had a torn, I don't know, needed rotator cuff surgery or Tommy John, I would feel more than comfortable with Leiter as my number 2 in the rotation and Cabrera as my number 3. Do I think Cabrera has the upside to be a 2? Yes, but I think in most people's rotation he's a 3. With the Rangers, they have the luxury of having 3 guys who are at least a number 2 or better in their rotation. I just think Leiter is that good, and I think he's going to take an even bigger jump next year. I think that kick change that we talked about in the offseason last year had its mixed results for the most part last year. I think he's going to develop that pitch even further with more time under his belt, and I think he's just really going to take off this season. So, am I going to say Cy Young for for Jack Leiter? No, but I am going to say he has a chance to be at the number 1 in the rotation for the Texas Rangers. Now that would mean Jacob deGrom probably isn't as good as he should be, but I think he has a very good chance to be better than Eovaldi has been for the Rangers ever since he's come to Texas. So we shall see. Granted, I am very high on him, but we shall see what happens. All right, try to catch up on a few more of these comments here. Andrew, do you think that Nick Castellanos gets traded or do they release him? I don't think he necessarily has great positive value. I don't think they straight up release him, though. We shall see. I think there's some good options for Nick Castellanos if they're able to eat some money or find another salary ballast to go the other way. But I don't think they'll straight up release him. Why is it taking so long for JT to sign back with Philadelphia? I think he's just trying to get the best deal that he possibly can. I don't think it's going to take very long. I think he will sign before Christmas. I think he probably signs at least a week before Christmas. So maybe even here at the winter meetings, but I doubt the winter meetings since we're already on night 3. Only got, a day plus left. I just don't see it quite happening at that speed. What would go in a Cabrera trade to the Cubs? That would be kind of pricey for the Cubs, but they have the wherewithal to do it. You're probably talking about one of the outfielders, Cassie or Alcantara. You're probably talking about one of their younger starting pitchers, in the minors anyway, and then that would probably be the framework of the deal. Rule 5 draft tomorrow. I'd grab Daniel Susek for Texas. I think they will draft him. We shall see. Rule 5 draft to me is always at least a little bit more interesting. One team that certainly doesn't necessarily value the Rule 5 draft, that's the New York Yankees. They haven't finished the season with a Rule 5 pick on their team since the 70s, early 70s. But yes, I do appreciate the super chat there, Sean. Thank you very much. Really do appreciate it. That's 2 nights in a row for you. If you guys do want to support the channel, be sure to hit that like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. If you want to submit a super chat, make sure we get your comment as soon as possible. I would be more than happy to help. More than happy to answer any questions you might have about this winter meetings. Let's see here. Well, Duran got the most value and is the lefty or righty. You bet the best player, and he's got a 45 surplus. I'm not arguing about his surplus and him being the better player. I just think for the Rangers, they don't necessarily need a guy like Duran. I'd rather go the younger route, bring in some prospects and a usable major league piece, rather than just have it all that value in one player. Now, would Duran still have value to the Rangers, I guess is the best way to put it? Absolutely. I would just prefer to go about it a little bit differently is the best way I can put it for you. Let's see here. You got the best player. You get the best player you can. Normally, I wouldn't argue with that. But, I mean, when you're talking about the Rangers in this situation, the best player in the trade is Corey Seager. Now, as far as the return goes, I don't want to put all the return in one basket. So say if Duran pulls a hammy and is out for a month, we're back in the boat where we already are from time to time with Corey Seager as far as an injury issue. With our current outfield alignment, you're looking at Nimmo, Langford, you're looking at Evan Carter, Haggerty, you got Hellman still out there. One of those guys is going to lose a roster spot. And we didn't even mention Osuna. Now, obviously, Duran is better than most of those options, but you already have a sufficient enough outfield mix. I think you just need a right-handed bat to complete that group. Maybe jettison Osuna from that group just to kind of have a little bit more righty-lefty mix out there, and I think you're just fine. But I don't think you're necessarily beholden to the idea of getting a best player available in this deal, rather than just getting the best overall value that you possibly can. If the value of Duran is 45, but you can get, say, 50 value combined when you take on the salary of Story coming back, and you bring in Cabrera, or whoever the piece is that you identify that you want to bring in. I just think there's other ways to do it, and I think the Rangers would be better utilizing that value that you mentioned, that 45 value, at other positions on the field. Let's see here. I got worried when you weren't going live every day. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, my friend. But no, I've been here. I've been here. Just been staying very busy, unfortunately. I'm the biggest Leiter fan. I just want to keep it going. I couldn't agree with you more. I just have really high hopes for Leiter. The what he brought to the table this year really showed me something. I see higher highs with him than I do with Cabrera. Cabrera, I think, is maxed out as a 2. I think Leiter can still be a 1, still very likely will be a 1 when it's all said and done, and I think he could even be there by the end of this upcoming season. Andrew, I'm a Phillies fan, but we are running it back. I don't see Marte coming here because the Phillies don't want to trade Miller, Crawford, or Painter. Absolutely agree. 100% agree with that statement there. I don't think they're going to try to move one of those top prospects. Their finances are pretty much intractable. Marte would be one way that they could improve this roster without really affecting their finances. It would be about the same cost of what Max Kepler was last year to them, and for an obviously significantly better player. But they're going to have to give up some of those prospects to get the deal done. I don't necessarily think they're going to give up the right pieces to get that deal done. And the Diamondbacks are looking for controllable starting pitching that's at or close to Major League ready. The Phillies aren't going to trade that type of player right now off their roster. Other teams are going to be willing to offer that plus some, and so I think they're going to be outbid for his services. I'm sure the Phillies would love to have him, but I just don't think they're going to be able to get that type of a deal done. Anthony, upside, can you do 3 mock trades if the rumors are true? The 3 teams that are strong conversation with the Miami Marlins for Edward, the Rangers, Orioles, and Angels. I could do one to the Orioles. I haven't done one to the Orioles yet. We'll do that one. Just did one for the Rangers anyway. The Angels, to me, that's not the right move for them. I think they would love to have a guy like Cabrera, don't get me wrong, but I think they're still probably a year away from being able to make these types of moves and try to continue to improve and get closer to a 500 team. I don't think they're quite at that level yet. Upside, Miami doesn't need any pitching. What we need is hitting. Do you see how much pitching depth we have in our system? Do you think we need to send more young pitching to us? I wouldn't necessarily say pitching, but when you're talking about a couple of major leaguers coming back in a return for Cabrera, if you get one pitcher back, it's not going to ruin the deal. You're not just saying, hey, we want 3 hitters or else. You're just trying to get the best return that you possibly can. And so if that turns out to be the major pieces being offensive pieces, and then kind of the back end filler of this being a starting pitcher that you really like out of their system, somebody that you might have liked in the draft a few years ago and were like, hey, I still want to get him out of your system, that could be kind of the filler in a deal. Not necessarily the driving force, but something that could at least get the ball rolling. Young and Ozuna for Cabrera, I would do that in a heartbeat if I'm the Texas Rangers. Then you free up third base for, shall we say, an Alex Bregman or a Eugenio Suarez or a Nolan Arenado, something along those lines. Now, Young, Skip Schumacher spoke about Josh Young today, basically saying he wants to get back to being one of the feared hitters in Major League Baseball. I would just like to get him back to being a competent hitter, a productive and consistent player at the Major League level, and get rid of the jackknife swing. Now, he worked on that a little bit after he was demoted down to the minors last year for a few weeks. He did look better at times in the second half, but there were still some of the old, Josh Young habits that he had with that jackknife swing. If he gets rid of that and gets back to the clean, smooth, through the zone stroke that he had when he came up through the Rangers system, I think that's the way to get back to being a more than a better than above average hitter for the Texas Rangers. If he gets that swing back, you could possibly have an all-star on your hands. That's asking a lot, though, at this point. And with 3 years left on his deal, his value being 20 according to baseball trade values, if somebody still values him at that, let them take the chance on developing that bat a little bit and see if they can get the best out of Josh Young. I hope nothing but the best for him, but at this point, if there's an upgrade the Rangers can make, it's at third base because of the inconsistencies from Josh Young. Ethan, if you get Duran, you can trade Carter. I don't want to trade Carter, though. I understand the injury issues, but he's going to grow out of some of the injury issues that he's had and some of the fluke injury stuff that he's had. Obviously, fluke in the name. It's not going to keep happening, at least you would hope. Now, with Duran, some off-field questions. I'm not saying that's the reason why I wouldn't do it, but I'm just saying that with the team that you already have on the field, you already have a good enough mix in your outfield group to not have to bring that back as the primary piece of the return. I still would be looking for either third base or shortstop if you're moving on from a Corey Seager. I would be looking at starting pitcher, and then of course in the bullpen as well. Where does Adolis Garcia end up? I'm going to go ahead and say that he ends up in Pittsburgh, but we shall see. Seager ain't going nowhere. There's too much smoke to me. I think that at this point, if you're getting his name out there to this level, there's got to be more fire than anything else to this at this point. And you don't let your best player twist in the wind like this. You would clearly come out and say, Corey Seager's staying put. He will be in our uniform on opening day. Even if you're talking through your teeth and you completely are talking behind the cameras about it, we haven't heard that type of defense from the Rangers about Corey Seager yet. Tells me that there is real fire to this one, that they are actually discussing these things. And if you're discussing it, you're already comfortable with the idea of moving on from Corey Seager if you get the right return. You're not just going to give him up for a bag of magic beans. So we'll see what happens. But for me, I think there's a very high likelihood compared to, say, a few months ago, as far as where Corey Seager could ultimately be playing next season. I still wouldn't put it at above 10% for Corey Seager to be traded. But I would say after all the articles that we've seen over the last 24 hours and in the articles leading up to the winter meetings, a chance that went from 0.5% to, say, 3%, I'd say it's up to probably about 7 or 8% right now. I would say the Pirates, though, for Adolis Garcia. Man, the Phillies really like their man, Kyle Schwarber, 5 for 150. Absolutely, Johnny, they certainly do. But he's been Mr. Consistent for them. Hard to argue if you're a fan of the Philadelphia Phillies for a player who's been worth every penny so far. We'll see if he continues to be worth it, even as a DH. Would you do Young for Sandy? No, I would not. I think Young has more value than Sandy Alcantara, than what he would be able to bring. Now, sure, if he's in Cy Young form, of course, bring on Alcantara, but he's not there yet. So once he gets back to that value, I think he'll be way more valuable than Josh Young anyway. But we'll see. Where does Marcell Ozuna end up? Honestly, I'm not sure he makes a roster to start the season. I think there's a good chance he ends up as a minor league invite to spring training anyway, but we'll see. I'm not giving up the farm for him, I'll put it that way. $1 or $2 million deal at best would be what I'd do for Marcell Ozuna if I had the flexibility on my roster. You like Marcell Ozuna to Washington? I think that would be a great signing for them a year ago, 2 years ago. Right now, I'd say probably Colorado makes a little bit of sense. Just somewhere where you're looking for a hitter to, trade at the deadline. That would make some sense there. Arizona in kind of a, I don't necessarily think they're in a rebuild situation, but not nearly in as a competitive situation as the Dodgers or the Giants will be, or even the Padres in their own division. I think that Arizona probably finishes as the fourth best team in that division, especially with the issues in their starting staff last year. Burns coming back health-wise, what they're going to do with Marte. I'd say if you can flip him for something at the deadline, would be your best course of action if you're one of these smaller market teams. Guarantee you he gets at least $10 million. That's $10 million more than he should be getting. But I'd say at worst, minor league invite, spring training. Best, somebody overpays, say $5 million. I would do at best $1 to $2 million. You guys already know my thoughts on Marcell Ozuna, though. I don't necessarily value him at what he did for a couple years ago with the Atlanta Braves, or in the first half, I believe, last year. All right, let's try to catch up on the trade talk that you were talking about there, Anthony. If we did a deal involving the Baltimore Orioles trying to bring in Cabrera from the Marlins, what would it take? His value, 27.6. Orioles, what would it take from the Orioles? You're looking for young position players that have some control. Mayo could be the primary piece. Do I think that's legitimate? No. I think you'd probably go Ike Irish, maybe, with Rutschman and Basayo already in your system. As kind of your top piece. Nate George, maybe. Do you bring back... Do you send Dylan Beavers in this deal? Nationals and Orioles have had steady communication about Mackenzie Gore coming from John Paul Morosi moments ago. Come on, update. Orioles have not completed a trade with the Nationals since the franchise moved to D.C. I mean, Very interesting. Per source, there is no momentum when it comes to the Red Sox interest in Seager. So slow down on the Seager talk to at least Boston. No surprise there. Second base is apparently moving. Multiple second basemen are being discussed in trades across the industry tonight. Brendan Lau's name is a popular one. Sources believe the chance of a deal involving him have increased this week. Don't forget about McNeil out there in New York as well. Heston Kierstad, maybe. Kierstad's value is at... Where is Kierstad's value? Zero? Zero. Zero. Really? Okay. Um, let's say you go with Elvin Garcia. What does that do? How close does that get you? 24 to 27, and then you get one more piece. 3 for 1 would make some sense for a Cabrera deal, I suppose. If you could get Kierstead as the final piece, maybe that would make some sense. Ward, I don't think you're doing. The comp pick could do it. Irish Garcia in a comp pick. I would love that deal if I'm the Marlins, I think. Depending on what you think of the prospects. I have no idea what those prospects would actually be worth for Baltimore, so let's take a look. Ike Irish, still 3 years away, 230 average. Not exactly great. Nate George, better. You could do Nate George. That would make some sense. Slater DeBrun. Comp pick. What do we think of Elvin Garcia before we finish up the conversation there? Is he not on their list? Nope. Okay. So I would probably take out Irish, take out Garcia, go a little bit more proven option at the big league level, and then maybe go a Mayo as the headliner. If you do Mayo, the pick, and say a Nate George, no, that's be too much. $18-year-old outfielder, maybe? What does that do for the deal? Yeah. Validate, post it. Would I do it if I'm the Orioles? I would be very tempted, but I would be leery of losing both the pick and Mayo in this deal. I'd probably make them pick a different prospect than giving up the pick. I'd rather hold on to the pick. Scooble to the Dodgers, here we go again. Really? David Pingalori. No idea. Let's see. What? What? I've heard this from nobody else that is doing coverage of the School Bowl or the Dodgers or the Tigers or anything else at the winter meetings. Is there any truth to this? Followed by Brett Boone, Jeremy Fowler, Kevin O'Connor. So I'm guessing an NBA guy to a certain extent. Huh. What does the tweet say? It says Orlando, Florida at Tarek Skubal update. I'm hearing that the Skubal deal is essentially in place. The pieces agreed to. The framework is done. What's holding up the deal now is a long-term extension and ownership approval in Detroit. The Tigers won't greenlight it without the owner's approval. And the Dodgers won't ship out that kind of haul without a long-term commitment to Skubal. That's the final hurdle. I think if this was legitimate, we would have heard about it from several other sources by now, because this has been an hour ago. This is exactly the type of thing you hear from lots of national reporters. This isn't just some insider that's saying something that the insiders can't say, or that the other national reporters can't say. So I'd say this is probably premature from Pingalori. I'm sure that there's discussions. I'm sure he might have even heard names in the discussions. But I doubt it's anywhere near this far along or even completely true. Otherwise, we would have heard rumors from other more reputable sources by now. I think that's the best way I could frame that. Nationals with Mackenzie Gore and the Orioles. We just saw what it would take to get Cabrera there. Unless they're giving some pieces off of their major league club, I don't see how Mackenzie Gore goes to the Nationals. All right, let's update our page here, see if anything else is happening. We'll be live for just a little bit longer. I'm still hoping that we get a big trade tonight. We will go live if there is one big trade that does actually happen. So if out of nowhere we get a Corey Seager trade, we will go live. If we get a trade tomorrow with Ketel Marte, we will go live. So make sure you got that subscription turned on. Hit that like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Appreciate those likes on the video. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. And I'm hoping with tomorrow being kind of the last final real day of the winter meetings, most teams are pretty much wrapped up and just trying to get to their plane on Thursday morning. So tomorrow is pretty much the last big day of the winter meetings. I would expect a flurry of activity, especially after the Rule 5 draft. Sometimes you get one signing or two before the Rule 5 draft, teams paying attention to the Rule 5 draft, and then some more trades and signings thereafter. Usually the last day of the winter meetings is a bit of an action day, so a lot of the smaller trades that they've been discussing and just trying to hem and haw over the final details will get completed. And then usually you'll see about a day or two of some silence as teams get back to their home cities. And then over the weekend, usually get a deal or two after that. So that's kind of how the next week will go for Major League Baseball. Again, we'll be live every single evening. Every weekday evening we'll be live at 9 o'clock, and we'll still do a live on most of the weekends as well. So be sure to hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already done so. But Andrew, I like your comment there. You would like the Phillies to get Brendan Donovan. I think he'd be a great get for the Phillies. I just think there's so many other teams that would view him very similarly. I am curious to see who ultimately will step up and pay the price to get him off of the St. Louis Cardinals. So that's one name we haven't really heard too much about, too many teams or names being discussed or anything along those lines. Kind of surprised how tight-lipped teams are being nowadays. 15, 20 years ago, that was not the case. If you had a player that you were trying to trade, by gosh, you would hear about it in the media for about a week or two beforehand. You'd hear about which teams were involved, which names could possibly be going the other way. You would get a lot of that information. Nowadays, teams are a lot more tight-lipped about who they let into that inner circle. A lot of this can be done on the computer as well, just eyeballing which teams needs what and be able to see which team makes sense for what. If you look at the NBA right now, same kind of a thing. Teams are very tight-lipped about certain things, but you know when players want to get moved. But you also know when you look at the Dallas Mavericks, for instance, and are looking to possibly move on from Anthony Davis, you can look around the league and be like, that team doesn't make sense, that team does make sense, that one doesn't. And then you narrow it down to about 5 or 6 legitimate teams, 3 of which won't have any interest. The other 3, how much are they willing to pay? So it's pretty much process of elimination nowadays. 15, 20 years ago, we would have known a lot more about the player wanting in or out, the agent's process in this, which players were ultimately targeted for by the other team. You know, for instance, Mavericks would be interested in Jaden Ivey from the Pistons or something along those lines. You get a lot of articles about that. Nowadays, those teams are keeping it to two or three people in their front office and letting everybody else do the grunt work on which players they might want to take a look at. But those guys that are in that inner circle don't usually give up that type of information anymore. So just be wary of what you see, what you read out there. For instance, that Scooball headline from what I would call a Lakers TV studio reporter for KTLA out there in Los Angeles, who is at the winter meetings. I'm sure he's got some insight, that he's been given some type of information, that there has been some discussions to some level. Whether they're leading him astray or not, completely unknowable. And if nobody else has been able to verify it an hour out, tells us that information probably not as credible as what he thought it was when he sent out that tweet. Now, it still may turn out to be right, but just be careful about the information you're getting and what specific information they're actually providing to you. There's the old adage, like when you're trying to lie, or like when you're trying to catch a liar telling a lie. If they're being too specific about certain things, sometimes that can be a tell that maybe they're not exactly telling you the whole truth. So kind of keep that in mind when you're looking at all these articles that are going to be coming out over the next 24 hours, as I'm sure a lot of these trade talks are going to be coming to fruition. Just kind of be wary of all of that. Seager. Are you saying something is happening with Seager? Logan White, legendary scouts. Okay. I would have said that with Seager, but I think there's too much smoke around it. We heard other sources besides just the Boston Globe people. Today was the latest iteration of the Corey Seager possibility of being traded, and now it's actually connected with a team specifically interested in him, not necessarily the Rangers wanting to get off of the contract. So that tells me that there is actually some fire to this discussion around Corey Seager. Whether or not they ultimately move him, I still think is on the unlikely side, but it's far more likely than it was a week ago. So we shall see. Appreciate you guys joining us this evening. Again, if there is something big that happens this evening, we will go live for you guys. Let me just double check and see if anything else is happening at the moment before we head out. Nothing there. Blue Jays hire Drew Butera to their coaching staff. Alrighty. Well, y'all have a good one. Appreciate your continued support of our channel. Thank you for the super chat. Again, if you guys want to support our channel, please feel free to hit that like, subscribe, send us a super chat if you'd like, and comment on our videos. If you guys want to interact with us anytime, we're here for you guys. And then on weekdays, we'll be here at 9 o'clock, and then on the weekends as well. We'll see you guys again tomorrow. Have a good one, everybody.